Ladies and gentlemen, your favorite Zionist white colonizer coming to you live from the United States of America. Douglas Murray has a new direct address to the people about the war in Gaza. Let's take a look. I'm Tall, the traveling clat. Let's take a look.
I'm Douglas Murray. This is Direct Address. The war in Gaza has restarted, as you have probably learned from the incredibly unbiased headlines which have filled the world's media. The BBC decided to go with the headline, Israel breaks ceasefire. The Guardian newspaper has gone with Israel strikes that shattered ceasefire. The Washington Post has gone with Israel breaks Gaza ceasefire. And CNN with Gaza ceasefire shattered as Israel launches strikes. What all of these news media seem to have ignored is that it actually isn't Israel that has shattered the ceasefire this week. It's Hamas that has been shattering the ceasefire since the agreement to have the ceasefire was first signed. It's Hamas that has repeatedly broken all of the rules of this deal, not least in its obscene parades of Israeli hostages. That includes the Hamas dead baby parades, where they brought out the coffins of Israeli babies that they'd murdered and paraded them in front of cheering Gazan crowds. The Trump administration and its...
Sorry, Douglas, I love you very much, brother. But he forgot to mention also the launching of rockets, which never stopped from Gaza. I believe it was February 14th. They launched a rocket and murdered their own Palestinian child. I just made a video about this yesterday. It was a short. Didn't get many views. You guys should watch it. They did it again on February 20th, I believe. February 26th, they launched a rocket. Again, both rockets failed, fell back into the Gaza Strip, injured, and one of them actually killed a Palestinian. Sorry. Please continue, Douglas.
Envoy to the region, Mr. Steve Witkoff, has said this week that there is a deal on the table, a ceasefire deal that's meant to hold, and that Israel has agreed to it, but it's Hamas that has rejected the deal.
True.
And you'd think that that would count for something. The deal's on the table, but amazingly enough, it's Hamas that isn't playing ball. Of course, Hamas could not just make sure the ceasefire continues, but could make sure that the war halts altogether by doing something which I've said they could have done from day one, which is to release the Israeli hostages who they kidnapped from their homes on the 7th of October 2023. Hamas is still believed to be holding around 24 living Israeli hostages, and those hostages include 21-year-old Idan Alexander from the US. Indeed, he's from New Jersey. But as this ceasefire was shattered by Israel this week, you'd be surprised perhaps to learn that it wasn't the case that the Israeli Air Force and military simply wanted to go into Gaza and smash some stuff up. You'd be surprised to hear that wasn't the case, because so much, again, of the media decided to misreport and lie in what they were saying about what is actually happening. The Associated Press has gone with the headline today, "Surprise Israeli strikes across Gaza kill more than 400 Palestinians." CNN has likewise parroted the line, "Over 400 people have been killed, Health Ministry says." The French newspaper Le Monde has gone with Gaza Health Ministry announces 436 deaths in 48 hours. There are two important things to say about these news reports. The first is a pretty fundamental one. The Gaza Health Ministry that all of these media are quoting. The Gaza Health Ministry is a wing, a part of the terrorist group Hamas. Gaza Health Ministry sounds like it's a ministry run by people in Gaza who care deeply about people's health. And in my observation, Hamas tend not to care that much about public health, either Israeli public health or indeed the
Correct.
public health of Gazans. That's not their shtick. They're just simply a part of Hamas, and that means they're also part of the Hamas propaganda network. So they just throw out numbers that they always come up with.
You can't count 150 bodies or 400 bodies in the matter of a couple seconds, which is what they did last night. It was an immediate 400 women and children killed. It's not physically possible.
In strangely round figures, actually. They come up with numbers like 400 people killed. They can always come up with these numbers like that. And they can do so in the certain knowledge that most of the world's media will simply repeat what they've said, as if we can all trust the Hamas health ministry. But the second thing that these reports seem almost not at all to take into account is, again, that it's not the case that the Israeli Air Force and Israeli army have just decided to go into Gaza and kill 400 people, as the esteemed Hamas health ministry would put it. It's actually the case that the Israeli forces have gone after specific individuals, doubtless with some civilian casualties. Unfortunately, that is one of the things that happens when you have groups like Hamas that decide to use civilians, people that they're claiming to protect, as human shields and hide among them in civilian clothing. Two of the people who were targeted and indeed killed in these strikes, and were barely mentioned in media reports, were two men, one of whom was the Hamas putative prime minister in Gaza, which you'd think would warrant some comment, and the other was a fellow by the name of Abu Hamza, not one of the many Abu Hamzas we've had the joy of discovering and coming across in the last 25 years or so, but this one was an Abu Hamza who's described in some of the media that have bothered to report this story as the masked public face of Palestinian Islamic Jihad. The masked public face of Palestinian Islamic Jihad. So he was one of the targets, and you'd think that that was something worth noting, not just the Israelis going in and trying to kill 400 people, as so many of the media said. But talking of masked public faces, we've seen a lot more of them in the US, and particularly in New York in the last week. And that's because there's been a return of the masked public faces coming out in support of a fellow by the name of Mahmoud Khalil. I say the masked public faces because Khalil's supporters, like a lot of the anti-Israel demonstrators over the last year and a half or so, are people who, as I've often said, are simultaneously very, very hot for jihad and also very fearful of COVID-19. They cover most of the top of their face with their COVID masks, and the lower part, and sometimes a bit of the top part as well, with a hot keffiyeh. And by that means, they manage to kind of both be very, very brave and complete cowards, of course. However, this guy, Mahmoud Khalil, who they're all coming out in support of, is a 30-year-old. He was one of the instigators and organizers of the often violent and extremely racist protests at Columbia University since the 7th of October 2023. You might wonder what a 30-year-old's doing at Columbia University, and I've been wondering that a bit. It turns out, by the way, that this guy who was organizing these protests and leading them lived in Columbia University student accommodation, but was not actually a student. That's an odd thing in itself.
That's new.
Perhaps the American taxpayer that subsidizes Columbia might ask why they're paying for a foreign national to live in student accommodation at an American university. But park that for a side at the moment. The main reason why Mr. Khalil is in the news is because he was detained by the authorities in New York. He was removed to a detention facility in Louisiana. And that's because the Trump administration has decided that America doesn't really need to have a lot more foreign nationals in the US who are hot for jihad. And so they decided that America could do without him. However, there's been an enormous amount of objection to that. The objections to it have come from many quarters, but one of the most striking is from Mahmoud Khalil, the 30-year-old non-student from Columbia's wife. She issued a statement to the media that's gone absolutely everywhere, in which she said, among other things, quote, "My husband was kidnapped from our home." Presumably that's the home on the student accommodation at Columbia University. "My husband was kidnapped from our home." She went on to say, "I demand his immediate release." And she went on to say, "Every day without him is filled with uncertainty." Now, from his detention facility in Louisiana, where he's got all of the legal help he could possibly ask for, Khalil himself just today issued a statement, which again has gone all across the world's media. He said, among other things, from Louisiana, from the hellhole of Louisiana, quote, "I wake to cold mornings and spend long days bearing witness to the quiet injustices underway in the United States of America." I find that very interesting because on Wednesday morning, a judge ruled against the US government's efforts to deport Khalil and has now referred his case through the court system to a federal court in New Jersey. And that kind of brings us full circle, doesn't it? Because if Mahmoud Khalil's wife, his family, supporters, and others are concerned about people being kidnapped from their homes, if they're concerned to call for people's immediate release or are worried about families who are filled with uncertainty for their relatives, if they're worried, as Khalil himself has said, about people waking to cold mornings and bearing witness to injustices, then perhaps all of these folks could bear in mind 21-year-old Eden Alexander from New Jersey, because he's seen far more injustice, far more cold mornings, and far more coldness from the so-called social justice movements in the United States than Mahmoud Khalil, who's cheered on the kidnappers of that young man from New Jersey.
Yeah, Douglas Murray says it great. We live in a world in a bubble of hypocrisy and bullshactery, as I've coined so wonderfully on this YouTube channel. And, there's not much else to say other than wake the F up, ladies and gentlemen. Wake it up. Wake up. Open your eyes. Because if you see the BS that's being spewed in front of you and you're unable to decipher what is real and what is fake, it's time for you to get a real reality check. We are being fed shit from the mainstream media, and we are being told what to think, what to talk about. Break out of the echo chamber and understand who are your real enemies and who are really there to undermine you and your nation and your country. As a dual Israeli and American citizen, I can tell you outright and openly, Mahmoud Khalil does not serve any purpose to the United States of America other than bringing it down. Other than bringing it down, propagating jihad, and making this country as shitty as his country he left from is. That's the only purpose. Deport this man now. I've been saying this since day one. Deport him now. Send a message to him and to all his jihadi friends that they are not welcome in the United States of America anymore, and that this ideology is not welcome in the United States of America. It should be open, cut, clean case. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you guys in the next one. I love you long time. Goodbye, class. If you believe in my content and want to support me, just know your help is needed. There's a bunch of great ways to support me, being PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, or joining my Patreon community down below. Patreon is the best way to support my channel, and you'll get a bunch of cool perks depending on what tier you join. Another great way to support me is by buying my merchandise on thetravelingclat.com. I regularly drop new merch designs like this beautiful hat, or this amazing shirt, where you can support the channel and get something cool for yourself. I also have an amazing Discord community with people from all over the world. Thank you so much for your support.